Welcome to the Critical Christian Podcast.
We're your hosts, Dan
and Justin. We ask critical questions about the Bible and provide questionable answers. Dan, today we're going to be in Genesis 25, correct?
Yes, we are.
This is a rather short chapter, so I thought we could have an unorthodox opening this week, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
I assembled a list of jokes. I'm curious if you'll give me your opinion.
Sure.
Okay. The best one I save for last.
Okay.
A couple of them I made myself.
Oh, I do.
So you will break my heart if you don't laugh at the ones that I made.
Okay.
Okay. First one. What kind of pork did the Hebrews eat before the prohibition? This is relevant to our study.
Whatever pork they wanted?
Abraham.
That's funny. All right.
What do you call a person that only believes 1/8 of the Bible?
1/8. A one atheist?
An atheist.
No, it's just a one atheist. Mine's better.
I mean, it's accurate.
Okay.
Way to kill my jokes. All right. Which biblical city refused to follow the COVID lockdown mandates?
Biblical city?
Mm-hmm. Shows up in the Bible a lot.
Okay.
It's Damascus.
Oh, I see. That was yours, right?
Yeah, that was bad, wasn't it?
Yes. All right.
Okay, what kind of man was Boaz before he got married?
Boaz.
Do you know who Boaz was?
I really don't.
The answer is ruthless.
Oh, you probably married Ruth then, right?
Yeah, you get it now.
Oh, that's funny.
Okay, who in the Bible had no parents?
Was this person somebody I've heard of before?
Yes.
Was it Satan?
It was not.
All right, what is it?
Joshua, son of Nun.
Oh, is this a joke because the name is Noon or something?
Yeah.
Son of Noon?
I should have said son of none. Sorry. It's in Hebrew, it's Noon. But in English, it's none. Just a couple more. What do you call a sleepwalking nun?
Let's see. A nun with a bad habit?
Ooh, that is good, actually.
Thanks.
But that's not the answer. The answer is a Roman Catholic.
Oh, yeah. That makes sense.
That's what you meant to say, right? Yeah.
No.
All right. How does Moses make his coffee? Honestly, I designed this joke specifically assuming you already knew the answer to the joke.
Oh.
Because it's a two-part answer, and I assume you only know the first part, which is why I made the second part. So I'm really hoping you actually know the answer to this joke.
With water?
He brews it.
Oh, he brews it. Oh, okay.
But the real joke is you're supposed to say he brews it because everyone in the world has heard of this joke already.
Is that,
and
okay.
I say false, coffee wasn't discovered yet. It's just one more anachronism in the Bible. We can't air any of that.
We'll air some of it.
Okay.
We'll just cut it to the best ones.
All right, let's do the thing. All right, Dan, let's jump into verses 1 and 2. Can you read that for us?
Abraham had taken another wife whose name was Keturah. She bore him Zimran, Jokshan, Median, Ishbak, and Shua.
Right, yeah. So Abraham takes on another wife.
Mm-hmm.
Question for you. Do you think he did this while his previous wife was still living or after? Well, it said Abraham had taken another wife, past tense.
I mean, that's splitting hairs, isn't it?
It is.
Okay.
I don't know if I actually have an opinion either.
All right.
I just thought the question would be,
fun to ask.
Yeah, because there are a lot of people who believe that Abraham may have been a jerk and taken another wife while Sarah was still alive.
You know what? I'll say there are a lot of things I'm not sure I like about Abraham.
Right.
But one thing he's always shown is that he's been devoted to Sarah. I mean, she was barren for 100 years or whatever.
Yeah.
And as you said, you're legally allowed to divorce them, right? You know?
Yep.
And Abraham's like, no, we're not going to do it. So I think in that regard, he probably stayed faithful.
Of all the things we've blamed Abraham for, I don't believe not loving his wife would be counted. As far as I can tell, he loves Sarah through and through and through.
Mm-hmm.
And he stays by her even when she makes decisions that he doesn't approve of.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he didn't want to send Hagar and Ishmael out.
Right.
And it wasn't his idea to sleep with Hagar to begin with. It was Sarah's idea.
Mm-hmm.
So I think your point is a good one. If Abraham did take a concubine, he most likely did so after Sarah died.
I'm not agreeing with that one. I mean, he had concubines before Sarah died, right? I mean, Hagar?
Right, but again, Hagar was Sarah's idea.
I'm just saying, I have a feeling they all had concubines and they all thought it was perfectly fine.
It was acceptable for people in this time period to take on concubines. It's not like it would necessarily be a slap in the face, but it was it did lead to problems when you had multiple wives. And I think some people in the ancient world, even though they knew it was acceptable, avoided the practice to avoid the inter-household strife. If that makes sense.
No, I get it. I'm just saying the only reason it's not okay now is because we have modern sensibilities or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I don't think it's because the Bible actually says it's wrong.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. No, the Bible in no way states explicitly that having multiple wives is wrong. In fact, there are laws in the Old Testament specifically talking about what do you do if you take a second wife?
Mm-hmm.
You know? So, yeah, that's a good point. But there's one theory about Keturah that I thought was interesting. So what we can learn from Keturah first is that Abraham was not the reason why he and Sarah were not conceiving.
Oh.
Which originally when we read the passage, there was some questions on, well, whose fault is it really that they were unable to conceive?
Oh, yeah, that's a good point.
But it seems from this passage, if Abraham is able to have children with Hagar, and he's able to have children with Keturah.
A lot of them.
It would seem. All right, the other thing that I wanted to talk about was a really interesting Jewish tradition about the concubine Keturah. According to some of the Jewish Midrash, it was believed that Keturah and Hagar are names for the same person. So Abraham theoretically remarried Hagar after his wife Sarah passed. This opinion was adopted and popularized by 11th century scholar Rashi. Possible justifications for this opinion include the fact that Keturah is referenced in 1 Chronicles 1:32 as Abraham's concubine in the singular, meaning he only had one concubine named in the scriptures, and several other verses which suggest that the descendants of Hagar and Keturah lived in the same territory and formed a single ethnic group, which we're going to get to in this chapter. However, personally, I find this to be a bit of a stretch. While it may cast Abraham in a more positive light because he sort of tried to undo some of the damage he did in the past, I don't think that there's enough biblical justification to assume that these were the same women. The name Keturah, which is interesting, actually means the root word something like perfume or incense. And the Arabian people were well known for their incense and their perfumes. And they are still known for that today, in fact. Not only that, the children of Keturah, most of their names have Arabian-sounding endings that end in the long A, A-N, so An. So, nevertheless, I just say that to say, Keturah's descendants and Hagar's descendants did end up mingling.
Mm.
So, the theory that they might have been the same woman is not completely out of place. I just don't think biblically there's a good way to justify it. Yeah. Can you read verses 5-6 for us.
Abraham left everything he owned to Isaac, but while he was still living, he gave gifts to the sons of his concubines and sent them away from his son Isaac to the land of the east.
Yeah. How did this one strike you, Dan?
Kind of as a slap in the face to all his new children.
Yep.
Yeah.
I kind of felt the same way.
Right.
Right? It's a bit of a head scratcher for me why Abraham is described as being righteous, but he's also seen just randomly banging young ladies into his old age and producing more children that were not part of the promise. So it seems to me that a righteous man at some point would know when to hang it up.
Right. Yeah.
100-something years old. I can only assume that the concubine was, a third of his age. Two interesting things here, Dan. One, it states that he had 2 concubines, or at least more than one, because it says the sons of his concubines, plural. Mm-hmm. But the second part of this, which does not paint him in a good light, of course, is the fact that he sent them away specifically from his son Isaac into the land of the east. So it's Abraham's doing that they ended up in the east. He sent them away. Why would he do that? Is Abraham the reason why his descendants didn't get along? Or was this part of the curse/prophecy from God?
I have literally no idea.
Remember when Hagar was in the desert? She was near death, and God said, I will make you into a great nation, but your son will be, against his brothers. He'll be like a wild mule or something of that nature. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. That was the sort of the curse/prophecy I was referring to.
Okay. And why would that affect all his other children as well?
That's a really good point, because theoretically that would only be the children of Hagar, not the children of Keturah.
Right.
But children of Keturah are sent away in the same exact manner as the children of Hagar.
Well, I mean, it didn't sound like he was sending them out into the desert to die, so he's got that at least.
Yeah, basically from what we can tell, they did settle along here in the wilderness of Shur, and then all the way south. If you go past the southern boundary, where it says Havilah, that's kind of the end of the territory. So this whole western part of the Arabian Peninsula belonged to the descendants of Keturah and Ishmael. So it wasn't a terrible territory. Like, they had water. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? It was just, maybe a little hot. But nevertheless, I personally, as you said, it seems like kind of a slap in the face that not only was the blessing only given to Isaac, the rest of the children are completely cut out of the blessing for no reason that we can ascertain.
How much land did Abraham have?
We're not really told.
I mean, it had to have been a lot, right? I mean, he had a lot of everything.
Yeah.
He couldn't have given some of that away to his other children?
That's a good point. Did he have enough land that he could have divided it between all of his children? I would have to assume the answer is yes.
I mean, he bought that whole area just for the burial of Sarah, right?
Money was not an issue.
Right.
He gave gifts to his sons, but no inheritance, we would assume.
I wonder what the gifts were then.
Yeah, I'm quite curious. I assume it's monetary or like cattle, maybe.
I mean, was it in lieu of an inheritance? And so it was actually okay?
It seems that way. I think that's what the author of the narrative is implying, is that the gifts were in lieu of an inheritance so that they wouldn't be completely left out. Because from everything I've been able to tell from the Abraham narrative is that he wants to be a good father. And the only reason why Ishmael was kicked out and sent into the desert to die was because his wife Sarah hated Hagar. Let's move on to 25:7. Abraham lived 175 years. And your question was, there's no way he lived that long, so how long did he live? And of course, my answer is, I'm not sure we have any way of knowing.
Mm-hmm.
But it is interesting that his children live long lives, but not as long.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the lives of the patriarchs gradually get shorter and shorter as we get away from the flood.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like the only reason they did that is because, obviously, when they were writing the Bible, people did not live 175 years. So eventually they had to, lower the ages of people. And I'm just saying, I don't think they ever really lived 175 years.
Right. Yeah. Well, the other thing too is I'm not sure that the names we read in the patriarchal narratives are real names anyways. And we've all gone over this. All the names of the people correspond to their role in the story.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And even Keturah, when we meet Keturah, even the name Ishmael just means God will hear, which corresponds to the story when they were discovered by the angel of Yahweh in the desert. So all of the characters we've read up to this point, their names seem to be indicative of their role in the story, even Keturah. And I'm not entirely sure that these people didn't exist, but I'm fairly certain that these weren't their real names.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Especially when we get to the names of like these people groups, like the offsprings of Ishmael and Keturah, it seems unlikely. Well, for example, we'll just use the sons of Ishmael, right? It seems unlikely that all of the sons listed became people groups. And they did. These sons are identified with people groups that live in the Arabian region. But in the ancient world, it was very unlikely that every son you ever had was just going to be turned into a great nation. Fact of the matter is, one of them was going to die in war. Another one was going to die in some sort of horrible farming incident. Another one was going to die of a plague. Like, none of these people were guaranteed to live into old age, but every one of the descendants of the patriarchs somehow grew into a mighty nation.
Right.
So either one of two things is possible. One, the stories are sort of stitched together to explain how the people groups of the time period came to be,
mm-hmm.
or God's providence is so great that he just held everything together. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's got to be one of those two. Let's do 25:9. Can you read that?
His sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the cave of Machpelah near Mamre, in the field of Ephron, son of Zohar the Hittite.
Any thoughts?
I was pretty sure we were never going to hear from Ishmael again. I doubt he even cared about his father.
I had a similar reaction when I read that Ishmael and Isaac buried their father together. My first thought was that Ishmael probably harbored some resentment for his treatment,
mm-hmm.
especially if we follow part of the biblical narrative and we assume that he was 16 when he was kicked out of the house. Of course, neither one of us believe that, but nevertheless, if we assume that the biblical narrative is true, then it would seem likely. But I did think about this. At the time of Abraham's death, Isaac would have been roughly 75 and Ishmael would have been roughly 78 to 90, depending on how old we thought he was.
Mm-hmm.
So that means he was alive for an additional 65 to 75 years after these events.
Right. Yeah.
That's a long time to come to terms and kind of forgive your father.
I get that.
And I think anyone that has had a difficult childhood understands when they get to an age where they have their own children and they realize how difficult it is to be a parent. and their viewpoint of how harsh their parent was to them often becomes a little bit softened, and they tend to that tends to be the time that they reunite, is when they have children of their own.
Who was Ishmael's wife then?
I'm not sure it says.
Oh, I just assumed.
Yeah, in 25:13-15, if you could read that for us.
These are the names of the sons of Ishmael, listed in the order of their birth. Nebaioth, the firstborn of Ishmael, Kedar, Adbeel, Mibsam, Mishma, Duma, Massa, Hadad, Tima, Jeter, Naphish, and Kedema.
Yeah, awesome.
How come they don't mention a wife? Or
apparently the women were not important.
They were, though. We heard of Sarah. We heard of Rebecca.
I mean, they're not important to this story.
Oh.
I mean, I agree. The lack of a naming of a wife is
suspect.
Although I bet, if we looked it up, there might be other sections of the Old Testament that mention whether or not he has a wife, like maybe in the Book of Chronicles. It wasn't a huge concern for me, but maybe we should look that up.
We should do it.
So as far as we can tell, there's no biblical narrative that includes the name of Ishmael's wife. However, there is a 9th or a 10th century variant of this text from Genesis 21:21, when Ishmael is sent to the desert. The story concludes, and it says Ishmael dwelt in the wilderness of Paran, and that's usually where it ends. But in this textual variant from the beginning of the medieval period, it continues and says Ishmael sent and took a wife from the daughters of Moab named Aisha.
Oh, there you go.
So there's at least some textual variant or tradition from the medieval period, early medieval period that...
when is that? When is the
9th century? About 950 BC or AD?
AD?
Yeah, it's obviously, it's a traditional variant. It's not part of the original text. Dan, can you read 25:16-18?
These were the sons of Ishmael, and these are the names of the 12 tribal rulers according to their settlements and camps. Ishmael lived 137 years. He breathed his last and died, and he was gathered to his people. His descendants settled in the area from Havilah to Shur, near the eastern border of Egypt, as you go toward Asher, and they lived in hostility toward all the tribes related to them.
Yeah, right. But why?
I don't know why these were added. I don't know who the tribes are. No part of this makes sense to me.
Well, I think what it means to me is that this is an explanation for how these people group came to be. But what I don't understand is we just saw Ishmael and Isaac bury their father together, presumably because the relationship had been patched. Mm-hmm. Also because Isaac never did anything to Ishmael.
Right.
Right? If Ishmael was mad at anybody, he'd be mad at his father and his mother, but his brother, as far as we know, never did anything negative towards him.
Right. I get that.
Nevertheless, what I want to know is why the hostilities, and the Bible just actually never tells us why there was hostilities.
So you're saying that Ishmael's and Isaac's descendants, they were fighting amongst each other?
Yeah, in fact, when Hagar was found in the desert, the Lord said to her that Ishmael is going to be a donkey of a man and is going to be at odds with his brethren. Now, was that a curse or a prophecy or a prediction? Like, what is there hostility between the people groups because God made it to be that way? Or was this just letting her know what would happen in the future? Or is this just the biblical narrator putting his own opinion into the story?
Boy, that sounds the most likely, doesn't it?
Yeah, it kind of does.
But if that wasn't it, I'd say it was probably a prophecy.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it seemed like when God was talking to her, he was trying to comfort her, right?
Yeah.
So why would he comfort her and then say, "Oh, by the way, your kid is going to be a donkey"?
Right. It was kind of a blessing, but like he's going to be a great nation, but he also is going to be at odds with his brothers.
And I don't know if that's what God would say to her.
Yeah.
That sounds like somebody tacking on an opinion.
Yeah. And the Ishmaelites do show up again when Joseph is sold into slavery.
Say that again?
The Ishmaelites do turn up again in the Old Testament, and we're about to read it in a couple of chapters when Joseph is sold into slavery by his brothers.
Are those Ishmael's children?
Yeah.
What? Really?
Mm-hmm.
What?
Mm-hmm.
Really?
And what's interesting is they're referred to as Ishmaelites, not as their subgroups. Like when we're given the descendants of Ishmael, we're led to believe that each one of his sons had their own tribal clan.
Mm-hmm.
But when they show up again in the Old Testament, they're literally just called Ishmaelites. So perhaps not enough time has passed for them to become their own tribes yet. Anyways, yeah. So back at the bar, it seemed odd to me that all of Ishmael's sons would eventually become great nations. I'm assuming, and I could be wrong, that there were probably other children and that their names just didn't make it because they never had their own tribal groups.
Yeah, I really don't understand these tribes or whatever.
Well,
maybe it's not important.
I think a lot of them are important because, like, the ones that, we'll say the tribes that came from Ishmael, they all lived in hostility. I think, according to the biblical author, by making these tribes the children of somebody else who was kind of, we'll say, I don't know, halfway cursed, or at least not part of the blessing.
Mm-hmm.
I just think it for them, that's how they explain, well, this is why we have a hostile relationship with these groups. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And people believed that.
Right.
Instead of going, wait a minute.
Well, they didn't have anything else to go by.
Mm.
Right? This is sort of the official document.
I mean, we don't have anything else to go by.
I mean, we have archaeology, but beyond archaeology, I don't know how much we have. We do have traditions from people who lived in the Arabian Peninsula, but
I'm just saying we question it.
Yeah, everyone.
And they didn't.
Well, that's a good point. Yeah, I mean, you and I question everything.
Well, yeah.
But even the Bible, we question a lot of things in the Bible. But even in the modern age where a lot of things seem to be in question, the majority of people don't question the traditions that they grew up in. Think of the many people that are in the church now and what percentage of them grew up in the church.
Mm-hmm.
It's a pretty high percentage.
Yeah.
It's much less likely that somebody who grows up with absolutely zero faith whatsoever joins the church than it is for somebody who grew up in the church to leave the church.
Yeah, true.
Yeah. If you knew it since birth, that becomes fact to you because it's difficult and time consuming to kind of prove your own family beliefs to be wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's all we have for the week of the short chapter.
Wait, what?
That's it. All right, Dan, that's all we have for the week.
Until next week.
Thanks for watching. Remember to like and subscribe.
Peace.
How long did Cain hate his brother for?
All his life.
As long as he was able.
That's what, yeah, fine. But mine was good too.
Sure. Where was Solomon's temple located? On the side of his head.
Let's see. Was that one of yours?
No, I didn't. I like that one, but I didn't.
It seemed like one of yours.
Why did Jonah not trust the ocean? Well, because he knew there was something fishy about it.
Oh, yeah. That's great. All right.
Fantastic. You better laugh at this last one. Okay. What does Jesus and a freshman sorority girl have in common?
A freshman sorority girl. I don't know. They both died and rose in 3 days. What?
They both got nailed by sweaty guys in togas.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right. Yeah.
Fantastic.